The sun leaned gently over the thatched rooftops, spilling a golden warmth across the small African village where life moved at its own quiet rhythm. The air carried the mingled scents of fresh millet porridge, smoke from cooking fires, and the earthy dust kicked up by bare feet running through open courtyards. Chickens scratched near the edges of mud brick homes, and goats wandered lazily, bleating as if they too were part of the daily chorus. It was a place where the days were long, the nights filled with drumbeats, and laughter came easily from the hearts of children who knew nothing of worry. Among those children was a boy whose name the village knew well, though at this age he was simply another voice in the laughter that echoed across the fields. His hair was always ruffled with dust, his knees perpetually scraped, and his smile shone with the freedom only childhood could give. From sunrise to dusk, he ran across the wide, open land, his arms stretched like wings, his small body chasing after goats, shadows, and dreams. He belonged to no one and to everyone at once, a child woven into the fabric of the village. But there was one who was different, a boy who seemed to belong to him alone. This friend had appeared one day with no introduction, slipping into their games as though he had always been there. He was neither the loudest nor the strongest among them, but something about him drew the Maine boy close. He was playful, quick with a laugh, yet carried an air of mystery that no one could quite explain. When the other children pressed him about where he lived or who his family was, he would smile in silence, letting the question vanish into the air like dust caught in the wind. Together they became inseparable. The village children might scatter in different directions, some helping mothers fetch water, some running errands for elders, but the boy and his nameless companion always found their way back to each other. They played endless rounds of hide and seek, vanishing into the tall grass and reappearing with triumphant laughter. They raced along the narrow paths between huts, chasing goats that darted and stumbled in panic. They spent afternoons in the shade of the great baobab tree, carving crude toys from fallen sticks, their hands sticky with sap and dust. For the boy, life was no more complicated than the sound of his own heartbeat thumping with joy after a chase. Worries belonged to the grown-ups, those who argued over harvests or sat long into the night around fires discussing the ancestors. For children, the world was simple, the earth beneath their feet, the sky overhead, and the games that made every day an adventure. And yet, there was always something curious about his friend. He never stayed when the sun sank low behind the trees. As evening shadows stretched, he would vanish, leaving without a word. The boy wondered at it, sometimes even searching the paths to see where he went, but he never found the answer. Still, the mystery never troubled him. Their bond was enough. The days carried on like this, marked by dust, laughter, and the unbreakable companionship of two children who seemed bound by fate itself. But woven quietly into those carefree moments was a secret, one the boy could not yet see, a truth so powerful that it would one day rise from the dust like a storm. Little did he know those games would one day shake the entire village. From the first light of dawn until the shadows stretched long across the earth, their laughter could be found echoing somewhere in the village or in the wild edges beyond it. The two boys had made the land their playground, every tree a challenge, every stream an adventure waiting to be discovered. They would rise with the sun, hair uncombed, eyes shining, and with no plans but joy itself, they would begin another day of discovery. The great trees that grew on the outskirts of the village became their kingdoms. They scrambled up the thick branches barefoot, their hands gripping bark rough enough to scrape their skin, but the pain never slowed them. The higher they climbed, the wider the world appeared. The rolling fields, the curling smoke from village huts, the shining ribbon of the river far beyond. From the top, they would shout to the wind, daring it to carry their voices to places they could not yet imagine. When the heat grew heavy and the air shimmered, they turned to the stream that cut across the grasslands. Its cool waters called them, and they would strip down to leap in, splashing and racing until their lungs burned. They dove like fish, wrestled like young goats, and floated on their backs, watching the clouds drift lazily above. Hours slipped away without notice, broken only by their shared jokes or the call of mothers in the distance demanding children return. Yet when others returned, these two often stayed, reluctant to surrender their moments of freedom. On quieter afternoons, they sat in the shade of trees, carving toys from bits of wood. With stones sharpened against harder rocks, they scraped and shaped figures of animals, goats, cows, even clumsy attempts at birds. They worked in silence, yet the silence was never empty. Their bond was unspoken, the kind that needed no constant chatter. A glance, a smile, or the sharing of a carved piece was enough to say all that words could not. But there was always something that puzzled the boy. No matter how deeply they played, no matter how wide the day stretched, his friend never stayed when the night drew close. As the sun dipped behind the trees and shadows grew long, he would vanish as though called by some unseen hand. At first the boy thought nothing of it. But as weeks became months, the pattern could not be ignored. The friend never spoke of where he went or who waited for him. When asked, he would turn his head, smile softly, and offer no answer. The other children noticed too. They teased, calling him strange, whispering that perhaps he had no family, or that spirits called him home at night. Some grew wary, choosing not to include him in their games. But the boy never wavered. To him, the laughter they shared and the countless hours of play were more real than the rumors of others. He defended his friend when teased, chasing away cruel words with the same fierceness he showed in their games. One day, as they carved together under the shade of the great baobab tree, the boy suggested they make something to keep forever. With careful patience, they shaped a small figure, not of an animal but of two boys standing side by side. It was crude, uneven, yet it carried the heart of their bond. They decided to bury it under the tree, digging with their small hands until the earth was soft enough to accept their treasure. As they covered it again with soil, they pressed their palms flat over the spot, sealing it with an unspoken vow. They looked at each other then, and though no words passed, both understood. That little carving was more than a toy, it was a promise, a memory rooted in the earth itself, a piece of their bond that no one else could touch. It was innocence preserved, hidden in the ground beneath a tree that would stand long after their games were forgotten. Even as his friend rose and vanished once more into the lengthening shadows, the boy felt no fear of losing him. Their bond was stronger than distance, stronger than mystery. Whatever secrets his friend carried, they belonged to him alone, and the boy trusted that one day all would be revealed. The seasons turned as they always did, and with each passing year the boy found himself less free to roam as he once had. Childhood, with its endless days of laughter and play, began to slip quietly into memory. Where once his mornings were spent chasing goats and climbing trees, they were now claimed by the weight of responsibility. He rose before dawn to help his father in the fields, his hands blistering on the handle of a hoe, his back bending under the hot sun as they worked the soil for millet and maize. The carefree afternoons of splashing in the stream gave way to long hours tending to livestock, herding stubborn goats away from crops, and fetching water from the river with clay pots balanced carefully against his hip. The village, too, had expectations. As he grew taller, his place among the people changed. He was no longer simply a child running through dusty courtyards. He was expected to sit among other young men during gatherings, to listen to the elders, and to learn the traditions that guided their lives. He heard stories not as entertainment but as lessons, as warnings about choices and destiny. Slowly, the innocence of play was replaced by the steady rhythm of work, duty, and respect. Through all these changes, his friend remained a quiet presence in his world. Though the boy had begun to shoulder greater burdens, they still managed to find moments to slip away together, laughing like they once had, even if the hours were fewer. Yet something began to change. The mysterious companion, always elusive at night, became more distant. He arrived less often, and when he did, there was a new silence in him, as though he carried a secret heavier than before. Then one day he was gone. No laughter rang out from the tall grass, no footsteps followed down the worn paths, no figure appeared at the stream's edge. The boy searched at first, wandering the places where they used to play, the baobab tree, the carved treasure hidden beneath it, the stream where they had raced the currents. But his friend did not return. No farewell, no explanation, only absence. At first, it left a hollow ache in him, but as time pressed forward, life demanded he move with it. His hands grew calloused, his shoulders broad, and his heart learned to push childhood memories deeper into silence. He told himself perhaps his friend had moved away, gone to another village, or followed his family elsewhere. Such things happened often, and children learned to accept it. Slowly, the face of the mysterious boy became a shadow in his memory, a fading echo of laughter carried off by the wind. Yet the earth beneath the baobab still held their carving, a secret reminder that not all bonds vanish with time. Though he no longer thought of it each day, destiny had not forgotten. Life carried him forward, demanding his strength and his focus, but somewhere in the folds of time, the bond he once shared lay waiting to rise again. For fate, patient and unyielding, always finds its moment. Years slipped into one another until childhood felt like a distant dream, blurred and softened by time. The boy had grown into a young man, his frame taller and stronger, his face marked with the beginnings of lines carved by sun and labor. He no longer ran barefoot across the courtyards chasing goats, nor did he climb trees with scraped knees. Instead, he walked with a measured pace, carrying baskets of harvested grain, guiding oxen through furrowed fields, and standing among the men during village gatherings. Childhood's carefree laughter had been replaced by the steady voice of responsibility. The village itself had not remained the same. Where once he remembered the elders as towering figures of wisdom, many had now grown frail, their once commanding voices soft with age. Some had passed on, their wisdom carried into the earth, leaving behind a younger generation to take their place. The circle of power had shifted, and with it came both disputes and renewal. New leaders emerged, some fair, others ambitious, and the village often found itself caught between prosperity and hardship. Markets bustled on some days, overflowing with grains, vegetables, and crafts, while on other days whispers of scarcity stirred unease. The rhythm of tradition held the community together. Every gathering beneath the great tree was more than words. It was a reaffirmation of the values passed down through generations. Respect for elders remained at the heart of all decisions, for they were considered the bridge between the living and the ancestors. Men and women alike listened closely to their guidance, even when disagreements simmered. The people believed that destiny was not something to be resisted, but something revealed through patience, signs, and the wisdom of those who came before. A man might labor, a woman might toil, but the course of their lives was always seen as guided by a hand greater than their own. The young man absorbed these teachings, sitting among his peers, nodding when appropriate, speaking only when invited. He worked with discipline, honored his parents, and respected the ways of the village. Yet beneath his calm surface, there stirred a restlessness that he could not name. While others seemed content with the path before them, to farm, to marry, to raise children, to grow old under the same sky, he felt a quiet longing, as if something essential had been left unfinished in his life. It was not disobedience to tradition that troubled him, nor was it dissatisfaction with the soil that fed him. Rather, it was a hollow space that nothing seemed to fill, a silence that echoed louder with each passing year. Sometimes, while tending goats in the far fields, he would pause to stare at the horizon, his heart tugged by an unseen thread. In the evenings, when drums echoed across the village and fires lit up the night, he found himself watching shadows more than flames, as if expecting someone familiar to step out from the dark. The memory of his childhood friend had faded with time, tucked away like a story forgotten in the corner of his mind. Yet every now and then the laughter of children playing near the courtyards brought it rushing back. He would recall a face he could not fully picture, a voice that no longer had clarity, and the weight of an absence he never fully acknowledged. He told himself it was just the way of life. People came and went, destinies diverged. Still, the feeling remained, persistent and quiet. His story was not complete. As seasons changed and years continued their endless march, he carried that restlessness like an invisible burden. Outwardly, he was a man of the village, hardworking and dependable. Inwardly, he was a man waiting for something unnamed, a man whose destiny lingered just beyond reach. What he did not know was that fate had already begun to stir, weaving threads he could not yet see, preparing to draw him back to a bond once thought lost. The first whispers came softly, carried by traders who passed through the village with their woven baskets and weary donkeys. They spoke of strange happenings in the neighboring lands, villages unsettled, chiefs bowing their heads before an unknown figure, a man whose presence commanded obedience without question. Some said he was a warrior with unmatched skill, others swore he was a leader touched by the spirits themselves. A few lowered their voices to say he was feared more than loved, a shadow whose power spread quietly but steadily, like fire creeping through dry grass. At first no one paid much mind. Rumors were as common as the dust that clung to the wind. Market days were filled with such tales, woven into the chatter as women bargained over millet or men discussed the health of cattle. Some stories held truth, others were exaggerations crafted to entertain. Yet these whispers grew louder with each passing week. More travelers confirmed the same name, the same image of a man rising with influence that stretched far beyond a single village. They spoke of his retinue, men who followed him with unwavering loyalty, of disputes settled simply by his arrival, and of enemies who vanished without explanation. The young man listened with curiosity at first, leaning in as neighbors clustered around travelers. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes wide with equal parts fear and awe. But as the rumors gained weight, he began to distance himself from the conversations. Such matters belonged to distant lands, not to their quiet village. He had no interest in tales of war or power. His life was in the soil beneath his feet, in the goats he tended, and in the rhythm of the drums that called his people together each night. Still, he could not avoid the words entirely. Each time the stories came, they seemed to inch closer to his heart, striking chords he did not wish to hear. One market day, as women exchanged groundnuts and woven cloth, a traveler described the leader in greater detail. He was not only strong and cunning, the man said, but carried an air of mystery about his origins. No one knows where he came from, the traveler added, only that he appeared one day and has never ceased to rise. The young man's chest tightened at the words. For reasons he could not explain, the description reminded him of his childhood companion, the boy who had appeared without warning, who never revealed where he went when the sun fell, who had vanished one day without goodbye. The thought unsettled him, stirring memories he had buried beneath years of work and duty. But as quickly as the feeling came, he brushed it away. How could such a thing be true? His friend had been nothing more than a barefoot boy who carved toys from wood and raced him through fields. He could not possibly be the same man now whispered about with both reverence and dread. Shaking his head, the young man laughed it off when others speculated. Impossible, he muttered, forcing a smile. These are just stories to scare us, nothing more. Yet denial did not silence the unease. Each rumor seemed to carry a piece of familiarity that gnawed at him, even when he tried to ignore it. At night, as he lay under the stars listening to the soft hum of insects, he found his mind returning to those days of innocence, to the laughter under the baobab tree, to the small carving buried in the earth, to the friend who had vanished like smoke into the night. He told himself it was foolish, that he was imagining connections where none existed. And still, deep within him, a quiet voice whispered that destiny was drawing near. The morning had begun like any other, with the rising sun spilling its golden light over the rooftops of the village and smoke curling from cooking fires. Women pounded grain in wooden mortars, children chased one another between huts, and men prepared to head for the fields. Life moved in its usual rhythm, until the first distant thump of drums echoed across the plain. At first, the villagers thought it was a wedding procession or a group of travelers announcing their arrival. But as the sound drew nearer, the air seemed to shift, carrying with it a weight that stilled even the children's laughter. The drums were not playful or festive. They were slow, deliberate, commanding. Goats bleated nervously, and people turned their heads toward the main path leading into the village. From the dust of the road emerged a procession unlike any the village had seen in years. Men marched in unison, their steps heavy and purposeful, their spears gleaming in the morning sun. Behind them, drummers beat great hides stretched over wooden frames, their rhythm echoing like a heartbeat that belonged not to the earth but to some greater force. At the center of the group, surrounded by attendants, rode a man whose presence seemed to gather the world around him. He sat tall, his garments rich in color, his movements deliberate, his eyes scanning the village with the calm assurance of one who expected obedience wherever he went. The villagers gasped softly as they took him in. Some whispered that this must be the very man the traders had spoken of, the mysterious leader who had risen from nowhere to command fear and respect across many lands. Mothers pulled their children close, men straightened their backs, and elders exchanged wary glances. The name that had drifted on rumor now passed through their lips in hushed tones. The young man stood among the crowd, his heart quickening as he watched the procession halt in the center of the village. The leader dismounted, his steps measured as he surveyed the people before him. Something in the way he moved, in the way his gaze lingered, stirred an unease within the young man. And then, for the briefest of moments, the leader's eyes locked with his. Recognition struck like lightning. The world seemed to fall away as memories surged forward. The laughter of children running through dusty courtyards, the splash of cool water in the stream, the scrape of wood beneath their hands as they carved toys in the shade of the baobab tree. Most of all, he remembered the small figure they had shaped together and buried in the earth as a promise no one else could know. His chest tightened. Could it be? The face before him was older, sharper, hardened by time and power, but beneath the stern lines and commanding presence, he saw the boy he had once called a friend. The boy who vanished each night without explanation. The boy who disappeared one day and never returned. The leader's expression did not falter, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of memory, a spark of recognition. Though he stood cloaked in authority, surrounded by loyal men, for an instant he seemed simply a child again, bound to another by innocence and play. The crowd murmured, bowing slightly, unsure whether to welcome or fear the man in their midst. But the young man stood frozen, his thoughts spinning back to the days of chasing goats, of carved treasures hidden in the soil, of a bond forged without words. He had once believed his friend lost forever, just another figure carried away by life's winds. Yet here he was, returned not as a boy but as a man whose name carried weight beyond their village. The drums fell silent, but in the young man's mind, another sound filled the air, the echo of laughter from long ago, as vivid as though it had happened only yesterday. His lips parted in disbelief, his heart caught between joy and fear. He did not know what would follow, but one truth became clear in that moment. Destiny had circled back, and the secret treasure they had buried under the baobab tree was no longer just a memory. It was a bond waiting to be unearthed, a bond powerful enough to shake the village to its core. A hush settled over the village like a heavy blanket, broken only by the rustle of the wind and the nervous shifting of feet. The leader stood tall in the center of the crowd, his men forming a protective circle around him. Yet he did not immediately speak. His eyes, still locked on the young man, seemed to reach across the years, across the distance carved by time and fate. The young man's chest rose and fell, his mind reeling as if the very earth beneath him had shifted. Finally, the leader lifted a hand, silencing even the whispers. His voice, when it came, was steady and resonant, carrying with it both authority and an undertone of something softer, memory. "You look at me with questions," he said, his gaze never leaving the young man. "And I look at you with answers I have carried for many years." The villagers murmured in confusion, glancing between the two men. None dared to interrupt. The leader's eyes softened just slightly and he continued. "Long ago in this very village I was not a leader, not a stranger. I was a boy, barefoot, dusty and full of laughter. I played among you, though none of you knew where I came from or where I went when the sun fell. I had no name you could call me by, no family you could visit. But I had a friend. A brother not by blood but by spirit." Gasps rose from the crowd. Elders leaned forward, trying to remember, while younger villagers looked at one another in disbelief. The young man's heart thudded in his chest. He knew the truth before it was spoken, but hearing it aloud sent a shiver through him. "I vanished," the leader went on, his tone heavy with memory, "because I was not free to stay. I was born of a lineage that carried power and responsibility. My blood tied me to a destiny beyond this village. Men came for me, men who had waited since the day of my birth. They took me away not to punish me but to prepare me, to mold me into who I have become." He paused, his eyes lowering for the first time. "I wanted to stay. I wanted to remain in the dust of these courtyards, to climb trees and carve toys and laugh as I once did. But fate had other designs. I did not say goodbye because I did not know how." The villagers erupted into hushed voices, their disbelief spilling into the air. Some muttered in awe, that their village had once sheltered such a man, that their soil had played host to a destiny greater than themselves. Others whispered in fear, wondering what his return meant, and whether his presence would bring blessing or calamity. Children clung to their mothers' wraps, peering wide-eyed at the stranger who was no stranger at all. The young man stepped forward, his throat dry, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is you." The words carried both wonder and hurt. "All these years. I thought you were gone forever." The leader's face softened further, a flicker of the boy he had once been shining through. "I never forgot you," he said. "Not for a day. The games, the laughter, the secrets we shared, they carried me through nights when training hardened my body and silence tested my spirit. You were my anchor to a life that felt real, even when everything else was duty and discipline." The crowd fell silent again watching this exchange. The air trembled with emotion, caught between the intimacy of friendship and the gravity of power. The young man shook his head, torn between joy and sorrow. "You have become someone the world whispers about. A man others fear. And yet you speak of us as if nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," the leader admitted. "And yet, some things never will." His eyes glistened, and then, with deliberate care, he turned toward the great baobab tree that stood at the edge of the village. "Do you remember?" he asked. The young man's breath caught. Of course he remembered. The small carving, their secret treasure, buried beneath the earth as a vow of friendship. Without waiting for permission, he moved quickly to the tree, his fingers digging into the soil at its roots. The villagers crowded around, murmuring in disbelief. His hands, roughened by years of labor, pulled away the dirt until at last something small and worn came free. Was the figure. Weathered by time, its edges rougher, its shape less clear, but unmistakable. Two boys side by side. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some crying out in awe, others clutching their mouths in shock. The elders exchanged glances, unable to deny the truth. This was no coincidence, no tale invented to deceive them. It was proof, carved by children's hands, buried by innocence and returned by destiny. The young man held it aloft, his hands trembling. Tears stung his eyes as he turned back to the leader. "You kept your bond?" he whispered. The leader reached out, his palm steady though his voice wavered. "And so did you." The villagers fell into silence, caught between fear of his power and wonder at the undeniable story before them. Some bowed their heads, accepting the weight of destiny. Others held back, uneasy, their hearts caught between trust and dread. But none could deny the truth revealed before their eyes. The young man and the leader stood together, the carving between them, their childhood bond now exposed to all. Two boys who had once played in innocence were now men whose destinies had intertwined in ways no one could have foreseen. And as the villagers watched, stunned and breathless, they realized their lives, and their village, would never be the same again. The village, once steady in its rhythms of farming, trade and tradition, now pulsed with unease. The arrival of the leader had unsettled the very soil beneath their feet. By day, whispers threaded through the market stalls. By night, fires burned lower as families spoke in hushed tones, fearful of being overheard. For the first time in years, unity cracked and the villagers stood divided. Some saw his presence as a blessing. They spoke of protection, prosperity and prestige. What greater honor than to be the home of a man who now commanded influence across the land? These villagers pointed to the carved figure retrieved from the baobab tree, calling it a sign, a message from the ancestors that this destiny was meant to unfold here. "He is one of us," they argued. "The gods have chosen our soil to raise him. Who are we to reject what fate has planted?" But others were not convinced. They remembered the stories carried on the wind, the whispers of conquest, of harsh justice, of men who followed his orders with unquestioning loyalty. These skeptics saw in his proud posture not the child who once played among them but a stranger cloaked in authority, a man who could bend their fates with a single command. "A lion may remember the cub it once was," one elder muttered, "but its teeth remained sharp." Fear clung to their words, heavy as smoke. The young man found himself caught between these voices. Every time he looked at his childhood friend, the leader who had returned with such power, he saw flashes of both past and present. In one moment, the boy who had carved toys by his side. In the next, a figure whose every gesture commanded obedience. The tension within him grew, twisting like roots beneath the ground. Was he still the friend who had laughed in dusty courtyards, or had time transformed him into someone unrecognizable? The elders gathered in the council hut, their weathered faces etched with worry. The debates were heated, their voices rising and falling like waves. One spoke of opportunity: "If we welcome him, our children will walk safer roads. Our name will be honored beyond these fields." Another struck the floor with his staff: "And if we open our arms too wide, we may find ourselves chained by the very power we invite. A man who commands warriors may shield us today, and rule us tomorrow." Outside, the younger villagers wrestled with their own emotions. Some admired the leader, drawn to his strength and the mystery of his origins. They spoke with awe, imagining themselves joining his ranks, leaving behind the narrow lives of farmers for the wide horizons of conquest. Others, more cautious, clung to the village traditions, warning that power often carries a price greater than its glittering promises. The young man listened to it all, his heart heavy. He found no rest. At night he wandered to the baobab tree, staring at the patch of earth where their secret treasure had been buried. He remembered their vows of friendship, their laughter, the innocence of their bond. Yet when he recalled the leader's arrival, the drums, the warriors, the eyes of the villagers filled with awe and fear, he felt a gulf between them that seemed impossible to cross. When they met in private, the tension was sharper still. The leader would smile with warmth, recalling their childhood adventures as if no years had passed. But in the next breath, his voice would shift, carrying the weight of command, speaking of destiny and the responsibilities of power. The young man longed to ask, "Are you still the friend I knew or only the shadow of him?" But the words stuck in his throat, unspoken. Days turned into weeks, and the village seemed to teeter on a knife's edge. One misstep, one spark, and it felt as though everything could crumble. Some prepared gifts and feasts to honor the leader. Others muttered darkly of sending him away before his presence drew unwanted attention. Through it all, the young man's heart wrestled with the same question haunting the entire village. Was this return a blessing sent by destiny or a storm waiting to break? The debates of elders and youth, the whispered prayers of mothers, the restless dreams of children, all hung on that question. And deep inside, the young man feared that soon, they would no longer have the luxury of choosing. Fate itself would decide. The skies above the village had grown merciless. Clouds once fat with promise now drifted thin and empty, and the sun scorched the fields until cracks split the earth like wounds. Wells ran shallow and the cattle grew thin, their ribs pressing against hide. Whispers of hunger clung to the air, mingling with the unease already stirred by the leader's return. It was in this moment of weakness that a new crisis struck. Neighboring villagers, desperate themselves, came to dispute the rights to the stream that marked the boundary. What had once been shared in quiet harmony now became a bitter contest, sharpened by thirst. Harsh words were exchanged at the edge of the water, and the fear of violence spread like dry grass catching fire. The leader stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. He offered his strength, his warriors, his influence. "Let me speak for you," he declared. "Let me guard this village and no one will dare threaten you again." His presence was steady, his promise tempting, but the villagers' hearts wavered. Some nodded eagerly, desperate for protection in a time of need. Others muttered that his aid was no gift but a chain, each act of help binding them tighter to his will. The young man stood in the middle of it all, his chest heavy with conflict. He looked at his friend, the boy he had once chased through the dusty courtyards, now a man whose very words could shape destiny. He saw the sincerity in his eyes, the echo of their childhood bond. Yet he also saw the unease etched in the faces of the elders, the mistrust clinging to the villagers like a shadow. That evening, under the glow of firelight, the two of them spoke. The leader's voice softened, stripped of its authority. "Do you not remember our days beneath the baobab tree? We swore to stand together no matter what came. I did not return to take but to give. Let me prove it." The young man's throat tightened. "And what if your gift costs us our freedom? What if the laughter we shared becomes the silence of obedience? I want to trust you, the boy I knew. But the man you are now, he frightens them. He frightens me." The leader's shoulders dropped, and for a moment he looked less like the figure who commanded warriors and more like the boy who once carved toys with trembling hands. "Then let me show you through sacrifice. Not all power is meant to enslave." The next day, when tempers flared again at the disputed stream, the young man stood before the villagers. His voice trembled, but his words carried the weight of truth. "We can turn from him in fear, or we can test the bond of loyalty we once buried under that tree. I will stand beside him. If he betrays us, let the shame fall on me. But if he speaks truth, then let this village remember that trust is not weakness, it is strength." The crowd fell silent. Some frowned, others nodded, but all listened. The leader did not boast, did not command. Instead, he stepped back and allowed the young man to lead the negotiations. It was his choice, his trust, his risk. And in that moment, loyalty was no longer about power or fear. It was about sacrifice, about the courage to believe that friendship, even one tested by time and shadow, could still hold true.